I'm Saul, and I think my video is working and my presentation is working, I hope. I've been around the Yocto Project since 2010, which is kind of my, my second day on the job at Intel before I worked at Wind River was a meeting with developing the Yocto Project. So, but I actually worked on Open Embedded before that at a company called Sun Microsystems when we were trying to do a Java-based handset. Didn't quite go the way we expected, given what's happened in the world with Android. I did post my slides. I saw many people asking where people can find their slides, so I've posted in the chat, and I could also do that in the, if somebody wants to copy it into the IRC, that would be great. I've been working at Wind River for the last 18 months as an architect and technologist for the Wind River Linux project and working with Yocto Project. So this started off as a lightning talk, but I turned it into a lightning rod talk. As Trevor mentioned earlier, you know, we're trying to be inclusive to everybody. We're trying to not offend anybody. This one might, because it contains words that upset or offend people. This is a talk about inclusive language, and I need to discuss some of the language we changed. So please, this is the intention is to inform the community. Don't be offended by my talk. So, I mean, this is, you know, I'm not trying, upsetting people is not my intent. This is important. Language, as we've talked about and Trevor mentioned earlier, you know, in the introduction, language and culture doesn't necessarily translate across cultures. I use an example here, just, you know, in the US and Canada, we're asked by an institution to give our mother's maiden name. That might not be part of someone else's culture to do that. It's private. It gives information. It doesn't necessarily directly affect inclusive language here, but it's an important discussion point. Just to think about that we're not just talking about inclusive language, we're talking about how language and how translation occurs across cultures. Because some of the language that we talk about in this inclusive language or conscious language, as IBM pointed out, doesn't translate well. Folks in Europe don't necessarily understand one word versus, or Asia, and again, I'm not trying to call out any particular culture or language, but it's a translation issue. And so we're dealing with that issue. One of the things I will be open, I'm open to people raising their hand, asking questions. I want this to be an interactive talk rather than me blabbing at people. So feel free to jump in, and there are people out there on IRC and the Zoom chat that will sort of help maybe be more vocal to pipe in and interrupt me. Feel free to interrupt me. That's why we went from a lightning talk to a longer talk. So what is the inclusive language? So it was an effort started under Linux Foundation called the Inclusive Language Initiative. There's a website, inclusivelanguage.org. Their mission is to promote and facilitate replacing harmful and exclusionary language in IT. You know, as I started to say, you know, there's history of terms of just like blacklist and slave, and it causes emotional angst to people. IBM chose to call it conscious language, which is actually, I think, a better term in some ways, because inclusive means exclusive in some ways, where conscious means you're thinking about what you're talking about. So that's just kind of a groundwork to lay from here. All right. So again, this focus is probably, like I said, from a cultural standpoint, focus is more on what's happening in the U.S. And what's happening in English. So the terms that the Inclusive Language Folks Initiative decided on, where there's these tier 1 words, which is blacklist, whitelist, master, slave, and abort. As a lot of folks might be aware in the world, there's a big discussion going on around abortion. Unfortunately, this is why abort is one of those words that is a trigger point for some people. So these are the set of words that we looked at first, based on kind of the tier 1 level that the Inclusive Naming Initiative decided on. Just checking real quick. Okay, there. So how do these words apply to the Yocto Project? We've actually been looking at this for a number of years. I mean, this was discussed a while ago, and I'll come to this in a later slide, in the auto builder, where some of those master-slave words were discussed. So it's not something that's like, damn, we need to deal with this because there's an LF initiative. It was something that we were aware of, and we just needed to look at, kind of moving forward. So in the last year or so, a group of folks got together to look at a set of words, and we created a wiki page. John Masters was instrumental on kind of getting that moving forward. Folks got involved on trying to define alternatives to things like blacklist, whitelist, and master slave inside of BitBake and the BB classes. So we did that initial pass. We did a further review with Richard to make sure that the names were descriptive and technically valid. We didn't want to just, some of the alternatives, if you look at what the inclusivelanguage.org offers, were kind of generic pass list, don't pass list, and they weren't really descriptive enough of what we were trying to accomplish inside of the Yocto Project and BitBake. So we worked on trying to make them more descriptive than just generically replacing blacklist, whitelist with something, pass list, block list kind of descriptions. So how we went about this is we ended up with a set of variables that were renamed. And this is, I think, and I don't want to put words in Richard's mouth here, but one of the, if you think about how, dot releases go, a dot release is a major API, changing. A dot doesn't really change the API. So one of the emphasis, not the only one, for going from a 3.x to a 4.0 was we were changing APIs. So we were changing variable names, and we were changing them from, the old name, the broke name, to the woke name. Sorry, this is. I'm going to call out Randy on that one, so the rename variable list is the list of variables that we renamed, and so that exists still. That will exist for a while until we move forward, beyond a few releases where all the layers that might involve these the older variable, the broke variable names would be many of the variables, it was fairly straightforward on how to rename them. Some involved a little bit more structural change to the code, like the incompatible license handling, where we had a name called whitelist underscore some license name, where we needed to change that, and we changed it to more of a incompatible license exception with a package name. So this was kind of like an override, but not an override. And there was a lot of discussion earlier in the last couple of days about the override mechanisms, and this was just a different variation on that, but the handling had to be dealt with differently because it was a little bit more complex than being able to do something like an append. So these are fairly small and very targeted cases, and of course there are some BB classes that need to be renamed, like the blacklist.bb class. So the rename variables, this is a kind of it's a non-comprehensive list, but it covers it pretty well. I'm not going to go into every one of them, but the PN blacklist is probably one of the most common ones, is like a recipe that we really want to just skip. And the rest of them, are just renaming them in a more technically appropriate and descriptive way to name them. And again, if there's something I need to jump in on, let me know. I'm glancing over at the chat real quick. Doesn't look like there's anything. Paolo, do you have something more specific that you want to? Sorry, we'll come back. Maybe we'll come back to Paolo's question in the chat. I think this is well. I'll address it really quickly. I think it's language and culture is, and yes, that kind of the making changes based on one culture triggers people in another culture. So we're not trying to endorse or codify censorship. We're trying to be inclusive. And yeah, thank you, Paul, for attempting to respond to that also. And that's why I kind of put that opening slide. It's like, yes, this triggers people in different ways, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal, and it's very culturally oriented. And not getting feedback sometimes like gets me. All right, so where are we on the current status, and how am I doing on time?
There's 21 minutes till the next talk.
Oh, so I think yeah. I knew this was going to kind of be between a lightning and a regular talk, so we're going to have some time probably left over, or we're going to have lots of discussion afterwards. So where are we? We've gotten the Tier 1 renaming complete. I say complete because it's hard to say that there's still a couple that remain, but it's a challenge to rename those. We have tools to assist with renaming for layers that are outside of kind of. We've got OE core done, we've got Pocky done, we've got Meta Open Embedded done, but there's a lot of layers out there. So there's a tool, convert variable renames, which uses the rename variables to deal with that. But there are still words that remain in READMEs and other places that, and other layers that are outside the main purview of what the Yocto project exists. So that's up to those layers to work with when they update to Kirkstone to deal with. There are a small number of Tier 1 words that do remain inside of OE core or Yocto project, and they're mostly due to the fact that we're dealing with upstream patches. and configuration files that use or are named blacklist, or that contain. I left a note of myself in there for myself to get an example, and I live demo slash Saul's overloaded. I didn't get it done, but there are a couple of configuration files that I think in the network or kernel module area that say blacklist, and it's so ingrained in some of the code that it's not something that we as the Yocto project can affect upstream. I don't want to be the inclusive. I don't want to be the Yocto project. Doesn't want to be the inclusive language. What do you call it? Police on like getting upstream projects to fix themselves. That's up to the upstream project. So those issues will always exist until those upstream projects fix that, and that's just the way it is. So what are our next steps? Looking at the tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 word lists, what needs to be changed there? The biggest one is sanity, and again, this is one of those. It's cultural. It's overloaded. It's probably more North American, U.S. based than it is in the rest of the world. So that's one we'll talk about shortly. Segregate and tribe are the other two. Fortunately, those two we don't use, so we don't really need to worry about. Oh, you know what? I think I forgot to mention earlier. I want to go back and mention something real quick. Master slave, and I don't know if Beth Flanagan is on the call, or a lot of folks know who Beth is. She was really instrumental in the auto builder in changing a master slave set of words to what we use today, and I'm blanking on what we use today, but she was kind of on the vanguard of that, and I really want to put it out there and say thank you to her for dealing with that one. I thought I had that on a slide. I think I had it on a slide and I removed it. I'm sorry. I had it and I removed it, and I apologize to Beth for that.
It's still there.
What's that?
You passed it.
Passed it?
Yeah, I saw it there.
Where did I? It was. There it is. There it is. Yeah. So Beth did that. Pidge.
Beth is
that.
Pidge.
I was. It's one of those. I'm in presentation mode and I missed it. My apologies on not saying it earlier. So that was an important one that I wanted to point out, because she kind of set the tone for moving this project forward on inclusive language. So yeah. So segregate and tribe. Sanity is unfortunately pretty pervasive in our tooling for validation, and that's going to be a challenge on how we look at that one. And again, it's kind of American English usage, and it's part of this inclusive language. It's not that we're trying to be exclusive, but it's just a challenge. So we need to examine our sanity more deeply. I'm trying to make light of this a little bit. I'm not trying to offend anybody. Again, back to my first slide. What are what direction do we take on this? Some of the suggested words are confidence check, coherence check. For recipe sanity, it's recipe validation, recipe verification. So there's a lot of different words, and again, as Richard pointed out very strongly during our first phase that let's make sure we're using terminology that's valid for what we're trying to accomplish with the variable or with the terminology. And so that's one of the big ones. Another one that has been discussed and been postponed, or again, I don't want to get into too much of the politics around here, is the Git branch renaming of master versus main versus devel. One of the big issues here is resources and testing. So it's not a simple matter of just doing it. Yeah, sure, we could do it, but the breakage that would occur after we do it is, what's the fallout, and how do we ensure that it's done in a way that's manageable? And it's not just, the Yocto Project and Pocky or OE Core or BitBig. It's all the other layers that are involved within the larger ecosystem of what the Yocto Project is. So this is a fairly big step to take, and we need to have, from a project standpoint, we need to have the resources committed to doing it rather than just saying we're committed to the idea, but when? So I'm kind of calling out the community on this one, because we kind of had the issue in the first phase of people were committed to the idea but didn't pony up resources, and so we struggled a little bit in doing that. So I'm kind of gonna speak the truth on this one and say we need resources to make this happen, and so there are next steps and resources are needed. And it's not just doing it, it's also understanding it and making sure that it's tested well. And to that point, it is a community effort, and there's a lot of people to thank here. Richard, of course, as our benevolent dictator, we like to call him that. Ross, John, Armin, Michael, Marta, who's going to be doing a talk later, Randy, and the rest of the TSC. And there's probably folks I forgot. And I'm going to say this on the audio. Randy McLeod is great, and he's very focused on understanding the effects of language, because he helped me make sure that this was a good talk from that standpoint. And I think, thank you.